Yes.
Must be really hot over there.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to the second PAC meetup. So it's an honor to have you guys with us today. And we are going to talk about today how to organize and structure teams to perform as a self-service. So it's a topic that has been heavily pushed by Andy, by Rob, by Stain, and other members of the PAC. In fact, it's funny because the performance as self-service has been also presented in Santorini by Stain and Vasilis, which is here with us. And we all agree that having tools that make the magic, having things that make the automation possible, it's a requirement, it's a good thing, but if you don't have the right process, it's going to be a disaster because obviously one person cannot do everything within your organization if you have several squads, several teams. So you have to structure your organization to let your performance engineer help different teams. So yeah, today let's have a chat about it. What would be the best organization possible? So we're gonna discuss with the other PAC members. So I'd like to welcome tonight. We have lots of great people with us. We have obviously Mr. Perfbyte Mark Tomlinson with us.
Hey Henrik, how you doing?
I'm fine.
How's everyone doing?
We have live from Hobbit, the Hobbit Hole in New Zealand. We have Stephen Townsend. So it's a pleasure to have you.
Good morning, Henrik.
It's more like evening for us, but good morning for you, Stephen. It's a pleasure to have you. Yeah, I know it's 6 a.m., so it's an honor to have you wake up at that time, I guess. Otherwise, we have Vasilis. That was with us in Santorini. It's great to have you. Thanks to Connect and thanks to, I think you have lessons now. So I think you made I think you're going to miss your exam just for us.
Oh, don't worry, I'm not going to miss that. Hello, everyone. Live from Mars. I took social distancing seriously this time, and I followed the rules. I'm staying here.
And we have Tuan live from Amsterdam. So I know that small bridge in Amsterdam. I love it. It's great. So how is Amsterdam, Tuan?
Good. If you can see, it's empty. It's a live shot from Amsterdam. So I'm sitting here on my own.
We have Andy, who he is currently in vacation. So he had the chance to catch a flight from Linz to Kairos. So how is Kairos? How is it hot or how is?
I'm sweating like hell here. Well, we were supposed to be in Egypt this week, but obviously that got canceled. But in the spirit of being there, that's why I chose my my background image to be Cairo.
Cool. We have again another good friend from Perfbyte and Perfbyte Espanol, and we have Leandro Melendez that is currently here with us. And from Mexico. So I think it's great. And he is a big OBS user. So we see a lot of fancy stuff. So I'm so jealous because today OBS just crashed for me. So hi, Leandro, how are you?
Henrik, very good. As you well said, reporting from Mexico City. Very happy to help, contribute, and not enjoying so many exotic locations that I see everybody being able to go to, but it's just my living room. I have to put aside a little bit, but social distancing, no one near, so trying to behave.
We have also another person working at Dynatrace, who you probably everyone knows about it because I did some few webinars with him. It's Rob Jahn. Live from Boston, close to Boston at least.
That's right. Hey, Henrik, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you very well, but I don't see you. I just see you somewhere in the beach or somewhere.
No, I think you may have to enable video for me or click something.
Another situation like last week. It reminds me last week. So let me check.
But anyway, yeah, thanks. Glad to be here. Yep. from Boston. We're also social distancing as well.
It should be called physical distancing because we are socializing, obviously, right? We're not really, I mean, we're still talking with each other.
Totally agree.
So you're not promoted as an attendee? I don't have the options. So I'm going to promote you like an attendee because you're a guest.
Yes.
And you should be able to probably share your webcam now, Rob.
Yeah, I think you just lost him in cyberspace somewhere.
Yeah, so sad.
It's an attendee. Shish, I have to go now to... I know Stain is here. Stain is... Oh, if you look at the list, let me promote as a panelist, Rob. And I'm going to do something weird. I'm going to promote Stain as...
Don't do that.
Oh,
Don't do that.
You can't take it back.
And we have, I can see the list here. I see that we have a couple of good friends of ours. So we have Alexander Pudelko. So I'm going to promote him as well. We have Andrea Pagani as well. I'm going to promote him as well. Yeah. And who else? We have Eric Fairman. This guy's work for Dynatrace. I know him quite well.
Speedmaster is online. That's nice.
Yeah, we have Miko as well. Miko was part of the Whopper, so it was good to have you here, Miko. So I'm going to also promote you. We have Mohan from the Whopper as well. I'm going to promote him. I'm looking at the list at the moment, so it's going to be a nice discussion from several. So the other ones, if you do any remarks or any notes, I will definitely. Oh, I may have made a mistake here. Probably.
All these performance people in one place. It's like we don't have anything else to do.
All right. So one thing that I'd like to tell you about is, so today we have a specific theme, like I described it, but we have changed a bit the game. So that was a pure suggestion from Stain. So thanks, Stain, for that. It was a great idea. So now for the third pack meetup and the next ones, we are not going to define the theme anymore. So you are, from the attendees, going to determine the theme. So I think one of my friends and my colleague, Margot, which is connected, she is going to send a link in the chat. So that will be the link for a Google form. So anyone can push their theme or the topic, and the theme that will be selected will win Amazon gift cards of 50 euros. So if you want to have 50 euros to spend on Amazon to buy some microphones, for example, Leandro, I would suggest to push a theme tonight. Tomorrow we will select the topic that will be for the next pack. So don't hesitate to do it. There is obviously some gift cards involved. So if you want to buy some toilet papers or some masks, it's a good chance to do that. So 50 euros is, you can do a lot of toilet papers with that. All right, so without waiting, I suggest that we start. So I know that, I'm going to change camera. I know that from the last pack, Vasilis and Andy had a talk about automating performance in DevOps world and performance as a self-service, and Rob was involved as well in the hot day and others, different talks about it. So I know during the pack, Stain suggested as well sort of an open discussions about how could we structure organizations. So I'd like to hear about first with Andy, what's your thoughts about what would be the ideal structure or process to let performance as a sole service happening?
Well, I'm not sure if there's an ideal structure that applies to every organization, first of all, right? Because it depends on, I think, size, and it depends on maturity. It depends on, I think, a couple of factors. But I can tell you what I believe we can do to make performance more accessible to everyone. And also referencing Stain and his article that he, I think a couple of days ago, he posted on LinkedIn, where he talked about, how does DevOps and performance kind of fit together. And it feels, I think at least Stan, I know you are on the line now, you said, it feels like we're going to all be generalists and nobody has a deep understanding, and therefore we're kind of missing the opportunity of doing real performance engineering. I believe that on the one side, I think you have a point, but on the other side, I think we have the power of automation. And the power of automation allows us to get the knowledge of Stan and Mark and Vasilis and everybody else here, and the people also, the attendees, where we have a lot of experience on how we normally do our performance analytics, and taking most of this and automating it and providing it as easy as possible to engineers. I want to give credit now to Mark, because Mark initially inspired me to the presentation. Yeah, I know. Yeah, credit to. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if you initially came up with it, but I always take your story where you automated performance feedback in a way that people can kind of consume it as a self-service, opening up a Jira ticket, which then triggered an automation process, and then on that same ticket they got back the performance results. So this was kind of my goal, and this is what we have tried to achieve with Captain now, with the open source project, where I can now install Captain and I can say, here is my app somewhere, and please run a particular type of load against it, and then automatically analyze the results and give me the information back about, is this a good build, a bad build, and where are my regressions? And so I think, while I don't think this takes away the work of true performance engineering, capacity planning, and going down to the weeds of some of the discussions we had last week, but it gives everyone access to immediate continuous performance feedback on key metrics that are important. Now, what are the key metrics? These is also metrics that can come again in from us as quote unquote experts that have experience. Yeah, but overall, I think I really believe we can make performance more accessible, performance feedback more accessible, easier, thanks to automation. And it can be done by the folks that have experience with it and building it into the automation toolset.
But one of the remarks that was made during our last pack in Santorini, Vasilis, one of them making that note, and I think Jurek Van Kallen as well made that same note, saying that, okay, so I currently working in a project with 4 squads, dev teams.
Mm-hmm.
I implemented the platform to let them run tests. They have the power to launch tests when they want, to get the results immediately. But what about when everything goes wrong? What about there is a huge performance problem in the architecture? How can we help those guys be independent, in a sense they could analyze, they could make the right decisions, because here Jurek mentioned that most of the time when he's not there, it's panic. Something goes wrong. He received a lot of messages back and forth with the developer, says, hey, I don't get it, help me. Mm-hmm. So if you're one guy doing everything for all the dev teams, then I think you are becoming the bottleneck for the organization. So how could we resolve that? Mark, do you have any idea for that?
Well, yes, of course I have ideas on these things. The thing that I would do is first step back a little bit and kind of go from the origins of, should performance be self-service, and what's the ideal way for a team or multiple streams of teams to engage around performance. And the note that I wrote down just from Andy speaking in it, and relates, Henrik, I'll bring it back to an answer about reactive, and that's the opposite of being reactive, which is taking a performance action. And so one of the ideas when I first kind of got out of the thud power of let's generate a performance report with 1,000 pages of metrics and a huge PowerPoint deck and executive persuasion and all the communication skills and everything, I was making a lot of to-do about something when your everyday engineer, who actually, if they would have tweaked one line of code, we wouldn't have had any of these problems. And I thought, wow, that's a huge amount of waste. It's a huge amount of energy. There were a lot of people who made their careers out of that level quantity of information, but it didn't translate. All that information didn't translate into action around performance, either before the code is written, while the code is written, if you're engaged in writing the code and testing and that way, or even while the code is operating and running and we're observing it. And so what's the ideal team structure was, do I have to send my code off to a specialized team and have them do a bunch of magic wizardry and come back with 1,000 metrics to win the argument with management that your code is terrible and we can't launch this and we need to do X, Y, and Z? Or at the same time, we're going to optimize the budget around X, Y, and Z. And you've got sometimes people who wrote the code, they're like, well, why didn't you tell me that 3 months ago? I'd have redesigned this entire thing and it would run beautifully, but no one shared that information. And that was the impetus behind getting performance feedback, only the kind of information that one individual upstream needed, just enough information to get them to go, oh, I have an idea. I could write this differently. I could write it better. If it makes it all the way into operations, like you say, Henrik, where we are now reacting to something going wrong, if you're reacting in a vacuum, meaning you've pushed a release or it automatically pushed out there, or there's something in the ecosystem, the user behaviors, or crazy pandemics around the world, and suddenly everyone's online ordering, you're reacting in a vacuum because you haven't done telemetry upstream with an incoming change or an incoming release. So if you miss out on the opportunity to do very, very small feedbacks, and I say it plural because there's multiple different dimensions of feedback to an individual along that pipeline, then reacting when everything goes crazy, it's like, well, I didn't even know it was going to take more CPU. I didn't know we were going to have more database resources needed. I didn't know there was going to be a big report that's now hitting every 5 minutes instead of every once a day, and things like that. So about reaction around self-service isn't efficient in the large scale problem resolution, because if we've all been in hot on fire SWAT team stuff, you constantly have get multiple people with multiple monitors and pull everything together, or you work in an automated correlation engine like in a Dynatrace or in other tools that can bring all the data together and present to you what that root cause analysis is. That the self-service part of that, if you've got somebody who's never been educated that gets pulled into the SWAT team meeting, they're like, I don't really think about performance until it gets into operations. You're going to be getting over a learning curve. That self-service actually helps reduce that learning curve, because someone will say, oh yeah, I remember writing that code and I saw that it was fine. So something happened along the way. Oh, there's a patch. Oh, there's something else. So the process of elimination goes faster. So I think in reaction, one of the big things to think about it in terms of implementing self-service is that it's not a panacea to the big outage performance problem. It actually helps engineering upstream be more helpful or have a lower learning curve. When something does go wrong in production, they can say, well, we know what we changed, we know what we didn't change, we already have feedback from multiple levels of testing before we got into production, and we can analyze that the telemetry of the impact of an incoming release is actually underestimated. It actually took more CPU than we had estimated in our testing. Now it's in production. It's like, okay, well, we're just off by 25%. Throw more CPU at the problem. Bing, bing, have a nice day. So anyway, that's a long way around. I don't think you can just throw self-service concepts or automated feedback around performance for operations late in the game without doing the rest of it upstream.
Yeah, but I think a traditional developer, the notion of performance or the metrics that gets out of a performance testing tool or from APM could be quite difficult to understand if you're not being involved in that space. So Andy, you have something to say about it?
Yeah, so it took us a long time to come up with test-driven development, and I think by now people do test-driven development. What if we come up with SLO-driven development, which means when you write a new piece of code, then the performance experts, right, you don't need many, but the performance experts sit down with the teams and specify SLOs, and they cannot release, I mean, they're automatically checked, and therefore it basically just as test-driven development, you have to make sure that your code meets these requirements. And then people, if they don't understand what that means, they can then educate themselves and say, okay, well, what does it mean database calls, memory consumption, objects left on the heap after my test is run. So then the engineers are forced to learn these concepts. But if we first force a gate on them, SLO-driven development with a good SLO, I think then eventually it just comes naturally. Like test-driven development helped developers write better code because they first have to make their code quality so that they can meet the functional requirements. And now we add performance and scalability requirements on top of it.
Vasilis, you wanted to say something.
I agree with what Andreas said. I just want to add on his saying. So it's about creating the performance and testing the performance culture. We need to educate people on basics of performance first before we take the big step and show them how to do drill down analysis and find out about significant problems that we might find as experts in performance. So it's about cultivating the performance conscience, if I can say that, and making everyone aware of the basic what's good behavior, what's bad behavior of performance, what are the things that you will see in an application if it's misbehaving, and then automation can happen, and it can save performance engineers a lot of time, which then can be used in making performance more efficient, improving the costs, especially now we're on cloud, and using all this energy that we have in other things to add value to our businesses. So there are things that can be shifted to the developers, but at the same time, performance engineers are needed for deep dive analysis and resolution of difficult problems. So I agree with both Mark and Andreas. Both are needed, I think, from my perspective. And I'm trying to teach people in my organization on how to extract SLOs themselves. Of course, I'm there. We have the quality team that is there to guide them. So there needs to be a quality team to show them how it's done, what's a good SLO, what's about SLO, is it good performance, is it bad performance, but then they have to take over and understand everything about their application or microservice. And what I give them as a first thing to know is compare against the baseline. So how much utilization we had before the new change, how much do we have now when we have the same load? That's the basic rule, I think, for everything. If we increase the utilization or decrease the performance, then something is wrong. Our baseline is always a good way of comparing and seeing if performance has gotten worse or if not. So I think it's a combination of things.
But how? So, Tuan, I'm going to give you the hands. But one thing I'd like to ask you, all of you guys, you said there's a minimal luggage or a package that you need to train or educate the developers so they can understand. So after Tuan's note, what will be the minimal background of skills or knowledge that a developer needs to have to understand properly performance results? So Quan, you want to say something?
Yeah, also based around the baseline, it's for me, the tricky part is if you have an existing application, is setting a baseline because there may be underlying problems within your baseline. So you're setting a baseline with maybe utilization of 60, and you're going from that. So how do you see the challenge in? Of course, if you have a new application, setting a baseline is straightforward. You have new things, you know how it's built. Coming in a client which is already has a mature project or product and setting a baseline which has good SLOs and allows you to also grow and see issues. How do you see that?
Vasilis, you wanted to say something before?
Yeah, I just wanted to say about your question around the minimum. So I think the minimum is, first of all, we need to understand what is good performance and what performance is. And to me, it's not just a response time or the throughput, the response times under a specific throughput. It's more things than that. So to me, there is other aspects of performance, how much capacity we need for facilitating our demand, what's the scalability of our application, what will happen when our system starts growing, and then is it resilient? Is it going to be robust under a sustained period of load, or when microservices or when services start talking to each other, it might break? And also an important factor for performance is efficiency. Efficiency is how many resources we need for a specific load. So how much one resource is using. So every call is using some resources, obviously. And then we need to have a stable application. Stability is quite important for modern applications, as we see sometimes under sustained load applications tend to fall over. And it's quite important. But finally, is the most important thing is have a good understanding of the tools we're using to monitor. So the first, I think, point to educate people is know how to use the really brilliant tools that we have for monitoring and testing. And there are a lot of tools in the market that do a really good job, but people are not aware of the functionality. So education around the tools that are selected for each organization is one of the first things, and education around what's good performance and what's bad performance is one of the two things I would recommend.
Before giving the hand to Leandro, I have questions to Stephen. What is the skills required for a Hobbit developer? Because I think it's totally different type of skills required here. So what's your your thoughts about it?
Everyone else gets a question about performance, and I get a question about hobbits. What?
It's only microservices, right? They only
it's only microservices. Yeah, Lambda. Yeah.
So you have so you say that Hobbit developers are like normal developers?
Yeah, like don't discriminate. But
yeah, their code is just smaller.
Yeah.
Right. Smaller is beautiful. So Alejandro, you want to say something?
But they have bigger Java ear files, don't they?
Well, I wanted to add a little bit on what has been said and on the standards and having like a performance as a service, or very much in line of what Mark was mentioning, that I have observed in other places to be how is it being tackled and the risks to doing it that way. The risks are for organizations finishing their code, finishing their applications, and just throwing it after the fact to the performance as a service module department, or however you want to call it. I think for that to be avoided and to fall into so many of the problems that you are mentioning, like having like almighty SLAs, like nothing is supposed to be on the more than 2 seconds or 1 second. There are processes that can be longer. As Vasilis also mentioned, there are different metrics that we should be careful. And I do agree very much with the education, probably having standards. Performance as a service, again, leaves the door open to be that big risk where organization says like the performance something, we just leave it for the performance as a service or leave it as those tasks, where I do believe that for that to work, which could be a very good practice, you need to go over a lot of education around your organization, giving them guidelines, giving them learning experiences to be able to first enable their code to be load tested easily, to be performance measured, to have APMs, to have everything in place. And as well as Vasilis just mentioned, just a single tool, you need a big belt of tools to be able to monitor different applications, to generate load, to be able to manually or synthetically generating some activity on them and gathering all the performance metrics from them. So I think the very first step that the organization should take goes more in line with this education and understanding the processes needed and respecting those processes all the time to enable this performance as a service practice, where, yeah, of course, if you want to go, let's say your performance as a service is McDonald's and you want to go there, you need to get in line, talk to the cashier, follow some principles to be able to be served your hamburger, and to respect what is the type of service. Like if I say I want some line for my tacos, and I'm like, this is McDonald's, the process is different, you need to follow it a little bit. And many organizations do not follow those principles or enable them. As Mark was saying, like have your code ready, be easy to be called, be easy to be metered, measured, and to assure that the practices even allow some of the performance, probably not as a service, but to do some remediations based on that or analysis that you can analyze it to have it on always aware, have it available to call it in a way. So I think it's an interesting practice to have performance as a service, but there's a lot of work that you need to complete around to enable the organization to not to fall into biases and bad practices, vices, which is really easy to fall into, having like the separate performance, something dark side going on there, where the organization stops caring. You need to also be constantly enforcing and educating everyone and telling them, hey, you need to be careful. You need to bring good code before you check it in. You need to pass these fire loops, call it in a way, but to be consistent, to deliver something that is testable, usable, and that will not be not abused, but left just as it is and try to push to production. So I think the biggest challenge there is culture and being careful to have a set of steps to follow before you can ask for these performance as a services, and to also at the same time to not to be too tight, because again that can become a bottleneck to be able to release, and you might end up playing the Gandalf, you shall not pass, and no one passes. It's a matter of balance and be really careful and teaching everyone. I wanted to add those comments. Sorry if they're a bit too long, but I think I'll give the word to Rob.
So yeah, Rob wanted to say something. Rob.
Yeah, I mean, I love what we've been saying so far. And Mark, I kind of go back to what you originally started with, which is where have we spent a lot of our time in the past? And, really, was it adding value? And I just think before, now I work for Dynatrace, but before I was, performance engineer, doing a lot of work at companies. And I spent a lot of my time just trying to give a picture of what the applications were doing. So kind of that baseline. A lot of work in the past, and probably still today, is like looking at logs, looking at different tools, trying to aggregate it, trying to get a picture. And you spend a lot of time, like sometimes weeks, to pull this data together. And as soon as you're right, when you gave it to a developer, they're like, wow, I had no idea this was happening. So I kind of think like tools have advanced a lot. So obviously a tool like Dynatrace is pretty sophisticated and kind of can put a lot of things together in a single view. But that democratization is kind of another buzzword we use, but getting that data in the hands of people so they can see what their baselines are, getting it back to people. I felt like as a consultant for 20 years, my job was just sharing data between siloed groups. And so I really think a platform, and I agree with you that putting a solid modern tool in place opens up the same visibility to everybody what the data is doing. So that's kind of one key point. I'll just stop there, but there's a lot of things other people might want to add, but I feel like if we can automate that, performance data as a service, it's not so much even the testing part yet, but just getting that baseline of what it is. And, and every application is a little different. If it's a microservices or a batch job, those SLIs are going to different. And the only thing I'd add is now that we have the technology, if we can put it in the context of what that product owner cares about, I do think that efficiency is a big driver. So if you're looking at a portfolio of apps and 3 of them are like 5 times the utilization for the same kind of throughput, they're going to jump out and that's going to create action. Like vice versa, if you're a revenue generating app, if you can correlate what's happening to, what's happening on the business side, then that's actually going to drive motivation. So I think a lot of it is like, it's like the who cares, like there's so much data. So one, you got to get the data so people can see it, make it easily, but then it's also like giving answers out of that data, not just here's a bunch of charts and graphs. It's like, do I care about revenue? Do I care about efficiency? Do I care about, availability? Like one of those or a combination of those are really going to be your SLOs at the end of the day. And I think it's key to put those in those terms so that someone does something about it.
Mark, you want to say something about what Rob mentioned?
Adding on Rob's point there, if we've all been in situations where we witness somebody getting overwhelmed with the idea that, wow, I'm going to learn performance. I just got a performance kind of project or something on my story that has criteria around an SLO. And they just start Googling the hell out of things. And it's like, oh, look, I need to, let's say they latch on to something that sounds exciting from someone they trust out in the web world. Maybe they listen to Perf Bites and they misunderstood half the episodes. But they're like, oh, page life expectancy, that's the thing I'm going to focus on. They'll find some metric or something, and they'll start formulating assumptions about that feedback being the most important thing that they start making decisions on. So to Rob, to your point, where it's like, hey, are we using healthy data about performance in an appropriate way so that their behavior and their reactions and actions are based on metrics that actually are beneficial? Let's say they're working on web services and it really doesn't even touch a data source, but they're like, where do I go monitor page life expectancy in the database? I'm like, whoa, your payload has, who gives a crap about page life expectancy? As an expert, I'm here to help you get the feedback that he or she needs, and then start learning from that versus I'm going to start getting a whole bunch of metrics based on a knowledge base article or a podcast I listen to, and then just start monitoring that. Should I break it down and say, well, for your team, conversion rate has a lot to do with page layout and rendering time. For another team, yours has to do with how fast you can move payloads back and forth between these two data sources. And so totally different teams, totally different metrics that would help them. Now I want to self-serve that metric. I want to learn, I want to be able to sign up and subscribe and start getting that metric on every build, because that's the metric that's going to make me, oh, we're going in the right direction, or, ooh, we're not going in the right direction, we need to change. So I always try to correlate the feedback back to what action or behavioral change will a developer or product owner or even the business, how will they change their behavior based on even the most simple metric? There's, and we know in operations, there's thousands of other metrics that are important to do root cause. But to get someone to change their behavior, sometimes it'd be like, oh, if I saw CPU go up, I would do something different. If I saw the number of database calls go up, I would do something different. If my rendering sequence got wacky, I would do something different. So then you serve the process, you serve them as a customer. Let me help you get that data simplified and more frequently. And then here's how you can get it for yourself. And then bingo, as Andy and I talked years ago, that's self-service, but it's very, very small and very specific kind of feedback.
Yeah, I think that's part of the role of the performance engineer. He should be the advisor on which indicators or like Andy mentioned before, as SLO driven, whatever you name it. So I think that's the key stuff. I mean, I think I would like to give a round of applause for CMG Impact that did there was a very awesome presentation made by the person in charge of the performance engineering team at Hunter, so at Netflix. And the team is mainly building tools, building assets for the organizations. Then they give that in the hands of the team, and then they can analyze. And I think I envision that we should do the same thing, where we are building tools, the process that will make the life easier for the teams, but then we have to train them. Rob, you just raised the hand. You want to say something? No.
Me? Yeah. No, I mean, I think maybe it's part two of getting the data and the SLOs. And this is what I think excites me about what we're seeing with microservices and cloud infrastructures, is that you can now get these continuous loops of data, and that's, I just remember again, the big monolithic app testing, you'd get 1 or 2 test cycles every 2 months, and so you have very little data to really do something with. And it's just not that meaningful because code has changed so many times between test results and test execution. And so this performance as a self-service, I think, is a really powerful thing. So kind of maybe point 2, I really feel like by being able to provision an environment on demand, having it architected where it can kind of live on its own with maybe a back-end, virtual service, running it where you're getting continuous data, that's really that, Six Sigma kind of quality thing where you have these boundaries of, as long as I'm within this range, I'm good, and I think that's a really powerful tools. So this automation of combining the data gathering, the test execution, and the level of automated analysis, I mean, it's a pretty powerful thing. And I think it's very accessible now. I think in the past, you know, there was a lot of complex tools, licensing was expensive. You know, you could never get a dedicated environment. So I think the world that we're in now, it's like we have all the tools, we have the technology, so to speak. And I think you know, people really ought to be, you know, promoting that. So in addition to getting the data, but you really also really be promoting what is possible and what people are doing now.
Yeah,
Sorry, go on.
One of the feedback that came back before the lockdown happened, our digital teams, they all started frantically performance testing all our digital channels because they had a feeling we were going to lock down our branches and everything was going to happen over digital. But even they were doing their own performance tests and they had the skills to run tests. What they didn't know was what to look at in the results or what they meant. They didn't have any of that understanding and knowledge. So even in a basic looking at response times perspective, there's a lot of knowledge and information which they didn't have. And so immediately after that, I started investigating what they could look like. So I think it's not just about creating automation and automated SLIs, but how do you handle the person who's doing an ad hoc test and they need some information and to understand what's going on? It can be quite challenging.
Yeah. For me, recently, I find we have all these cool tools and cloud. We can spin up a production-like machine. That isn't an issue anymore. We had used to be, and metrics are automated, and all the issues are fetched for you and presented on a silver plate. But for me, it's still how you enable teams to make a good performance test. Create the right load is still, for me, it's the biggest issue, because tools like Dynatrace or other App Dynamics, they provide you the feedback on performance issue quite well, and it's getting better and better. Automating your infrastructure by use of the cloud, but the core is still creating a good load pattern or a good script. And I find that teams are mostly struggling with creating the right load. That's what I find. So you can do a test script automation. For me, it's more interesting.
Yeah, I think understanding the load that your application will be taking is quite important. So one of the things teams should be educated is on how to understand what to expect from the services. I try to get people to understand how load is performing, how web logs from production, if the application is existent, can be read and analyzed in order to get the peak moments for a service, and then be able to forecast that in order to create your ideal scenario. Scenarios and tests should be realistic, should be close to production. Also, another thing I want to mention is around monitoring. You said a lot of things about monitoring. We have all the metrics, the KPIs, but people, the problem is that people are not educated around how to understand what you see a graph with response time going up, for example, and they look at a spike and they think it's a problem, but at some point it wasn't a problem. It's just the caching hasn't started because this market that you're analyzing is quite low load. And then you see at the peak market and you see the response times are good because they are cached. So you have to be able to have critical thinking and understanding when it's good or when it's bad performance. At the same time, you have to be able to understand the pattern. So when I'm doing a RAM test, for example, I wouldn't expect to see response times creeping up in a good performing application, or I wouldn't expect resource logs go spiky and things like that. Things like simple things that everyone can measure. But what happens is a tool is people get lost in data and they don't know where to focus. And as I said previously, a tool with a fool is still a fool. So tools are good, but you need to have the right understanding of the tools and the KPIs in order to make that work.
Otherwise, you're going to blame the tool. I know that. Another one.
Exactly.
Steen, you're here. You got the webcam. It's awesome. Good to see you.
Yeah, no, good. Just put the kids to bed. It's multitasking. So they are nearly asleep, so I can join. So that's good. No, It's an awesome topic. it's one I have been thinking a lot about, and load patterns are important, but if I think about performance testing as a service, you need to look at the context that you're going to apply load on. So it's not always production like that you need. It depends on why you're doing a test. So if it's new functionality, it could be just a kind of a, my colleague referred to it as a micro load test, so just on that functionality. But indeed, providing DevOps teams means by, you can call it self-service or by automation to do something that you have created is useful. And I don't think that we need to look at why we can't do it, because we will have to do it to actually sustain what we are doing, because we can't solve everything anymore. So yes, there is lots of difficulty and complexity, but when we had the last spec, when Andy was talking about Captain, I realized that my focus should be not on looking at what's not possible, but trying to make it work and just see how it goes, because I can't do it alone, so we will have to go there. So that's my point. I don't know if you have discussed it, because I was reading stories for my kids, so sorry if I if I repeat other people here.
Rob, you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, this is what, we talked, we had a presentation, Henrik, you and I, with Panera Bread. They were a customer that's, again, kind of going in their journey, and they're really shifting their organization of their PE team to be enablers, so kind of what you were just saying about, you can't be the bottleneck. Even though we're all experts, we can't scale to support, tens or 20s of performance teams. So it's around putting these platforms in place. So it is kind of a self-service model. And you're right, it's not going to be maybe, as good and as deep. It's still going to have to be exception driven. Like, where does someone really need help with their SLO establishment or reviewing results or a triage? But if you can kind of put some guardrails, this is the term Panera used, they called them guardrails. So if every team was kind of adhering to some kind of standards, we had standardized tooling, we had a requirement that quality gates had to be done. Whatever your service levels were, they had to pass as a kind of a baseline for every team to follow. Then, it's really up to then that the PE team to really help figure out, these automated things so they can scale. Like, how do I get the data faster? How can I establish the SLOs? How can I validate something? What tools make sense to, build a cloud environment on demand? What virtualization service does we want? How do we want to do test data management? All of those kind of things then allow the organization to scale. Because I can tell you from the past, you only looked at the mission critical apps in the past, and because they had a dedicated team. But as we go to microservices, now we have, tens, 20s, hundreds of little teams building things, and you can't scale an individual to kind of monitor all those things. So that's kind of, I think, what's behind the self-service kind of concept.
So I think it reminds me of one because there was a good note that has been sent in the chat, and I think Mark just identified it. So Pankaj already has mentioned about when we build a performance cheat sheets. So I think that reminds me what you just described to be part of a cheat sheets, where at least the developers go and check one by one the different things that are required. So then you don't do human mistakes, or at least you reduce human mistakes. So I think what do you think should be in that cheat sheet? If we had to build a cheat sheet for not every project, because every project is slightly different, but if we have some common things that we need to put in the hands of the developers, what would be the common piece that we should provide?
Okay,
I think
sorry, you go, Leandro.
Oh, well, at least on developers, I would say the first one, before even checking in code, that I could give like a general guideline. Please always, before you check in code, tell me at least how long it took, each function or each piece of code, that you somehow can report how it is doing, so that, or automatically measure it by checking that your CI platform can execute something. The developer also put some way to invoke that piece of code so that the automation for it can be easier. I think like the baseline, the departure point that I would recommend is that from the moment that the code has finished cooking, you report how it tastes, to call it, to keep the kitchen theme going. But please, Stefan, that was the one that I wanted to add. I went nuts right away.
I don't know if it's so relevant, but yeah, I was thinking about don't just rely on averages as well. I know it's a common thing I talk about, but and obviously don't just rely on percentiles either, because that's almost every response time analysis I ever see is just looking at a percentile or an average. And a lot of the times I dig deeper and look at the raw data for a split second, I can see that something completely different is happening that I don't see. So look at the raw data.
So I can just to add, because I see some comments from Rubel, I think that's his name, kind of latching on to the SLO-driven development. So adding performance SLAs to the definition of done. So if you really have to sit down in the beginning on what are not only functional requirements, but performance requirements, how can we define them, how can we measure them, and then we develop as long as it takes until we meet these requirements. And if you can do this fully automatically in the pipeline, that's the best way to enforce this and to teach people that this is important, because otherwise you cannot get your code into the next stage. Right? And then the other thing, to the kind of the cheat sheet and what is the minimum requirement. When I did my analysis of performance problems in applications, whether small or big, there's a couple of patterns that are always recurring. And I'm not sure how much time I have spent and ended up with the same conclusion about it is too much data being requested by the database, inefficient queries, too much data being sent over the wire. So I think these are the basic things. And if we can automatically provide these metrics and then also alert on regressions on these metrics, hey, your code change has just increased the number of database round trips by 50%, then this is something you either have done consciously and then tell me about it, then we agree on it, or you've done unconsciously, then it's good that the pipeline alerted you on that. So I think there's a couple of basic metrics. And I think if we can get among all of us here on the call, we probably have 10, 20 different patterns. And if we can figure out how we can monitor these patterns and then alert on a bad value, on a regression, then we have a great way to start and say, this should be a basic set of metrics for your SLO-driven development.
Right. Yeah, for me, we always, also now we're talking about monitoring and seeing issues and detecting them. For me, for a cheat sheet, would start at the beginning. How would we look at an application? How are we going to test it? What's the approach? How are we going to build the script? How are we going to do the load? I think there's a lot of information about issues and metrics. But still, for beginning performance testing, how do you build a good performance test? There isn't a lot of good guides out there for me then. So for me, on a cheat sheet would be the first things with how you create a good load scenario.
I think for that one, the cheat sheet I would mention is it has to be you have to make a scenario that generates the load that would be generated in production. That's a good cheat sheet. So in terms of data has to be realistic. In terms of throughput, depending on the size of your performance testing environment, of course, you can send the same load if the performance testing environment is much smaller. But if, let's say, the performance testing environment is 10% of the size of your production, your load should be 10% or scaled up, of course, because you want to load test it, but let's say 15% of what you see in production so that it's equal. And then, of course, in your stress test, you can see how response times are performing. And back to what Steven said earlier, you have to look at the response times over time and not just the averages, because the averages can hide a lot of issues. There might be a spike over a period of time when your network was slow. There might be something that you will miss if you see the average. But looking at your response times over time is always a good thing and always help you to find performance issues early before later. But you can give to the developers, and I'm closing with that. Like you said, SLAs for every different application call. Is it a website? Is it a microservice? SLAs can be different, and in specific cases, I can accept a microservice taking 500 milliseconds, but on other cases, I won't accept a microservice being more than 100 or 50 milliseconds. So you have to give them the idea of where you want to get at your end user response time. So I'm giving them incentives in order to understand what the users want to see in the end. And if they can improve the front end performance instead of the back end, I'm happy as long as the performance is consistent and the application is scalable. So I'm giving them the option there to make a performant application just by advising them the SLAs in every situation.
So before I give the hand to Stein, because Stein was raising the hand, so I just come back from, oh shit, it doesn't work with Zoom. So yeah, I'll come back from the future with the Pack to the Future. And I thought that all the load testing tools were generating scripts automatically by observing what happens in production. So I'm pretty surprised about your fact about you should have load tests that reflects production. I think the present is quite far from my future. Oh, my present, or whatever. Well, whatever. So Stein, you want to say something?
Yeah, because I don't know if I totally agree with what we were saying about production-like load. For me, that's important if you go more to the right, DevOps left, right. So if you go to end-to-end and integrated, but what I really like and what I would see on those sheets is that when a developer starts with code, that you start a bit of an exploratory journey, that you start with one thread of one user with one data point, and you run it for 5 minutes quickly and you see what happens. Then you go with 2 users and you do just the same and you see what happens. Is it multi-threaded? Is it single-threaded? Does it behave? And then you actually start to understand how this code behaves. And then you will indeed further along go to, okay, whenever you understand the performance of that piece of functionality, you look at what production-like load is, and if that's okay in an end-to-end test or more integrated. But I really like more and more the exploratory testing and just doing some kind of testing, but there is some thinking behind that. And then sometimes I put 20, 100 times more load than it actually ever will get, but at least I will understand how it will behave. And then it doesn't mean that I need to create any defects, but then I actually explore the behavior of the code. So doing one user test, no pacing, 2 users, see if it's multi-threaded, stress test, very short, quick test, and see what the behavior of your code is doing.
I'm going to just give credits to Alexander Podelko, who presented. So he's here, he's connected. I don't know, maybe he's not able to enable his mic, but he said that, yeah, because I think we have, again, some credentials problems. It seems that even if you're part of the panelists, you don't have the rights, but never mind. So the one thing is, if you want to automate, it doesn't make sense if you don't know how your application reacts. So I think he suggested that before you do any automation, you should explore, understand, first of all, how the system is behaving under load. If there is no requirement of using Akamas, for example. I know that Luca is here, so I'm looking at him at the moment. So if you need to tune a bit the system, because maybe no tuning has been done. So I think explore it makes totally sense. Explore, I think it's the first brick that you put in the wall of your automation. If you don't know how your app reacts, then it doesn't make sense to go further on automating or doing any fancy testing. Luca, you're here, and it's an honor to have you. I think you're live from Milan. So how is things in Milan? And do you have anything to add to what we've been discussing so far?
I'm currently in Como. It's northern than Milan, and it's better because we have the mountains and the lake. So yeah, hi all. So yeah, I was just coming back to what we are thinking about, how to give to developers a way to be effective since the beginning of the line of code they are writing. So our experience is try to be involved and ask to be involved before starting to write the first line of code. So at the design, so it's what we call design for performance. So working with architects, mainly software architects or also infrastructure architects, and design on the paper, on in a brainstorming the full architect or the services or the whole stack before giving the green light to developer to start coding. And that's a way to be involved in the beginning and creating like a positive circle in terms of be involved, support from scratch the full development, and work with them in order to avoid to create check too late. So in a way to shift everything, let me say too much to the right. So that's not really a way to shift left. Is more left than the left side, let me say. So it's on paper still, and that this work, which work properly. But you know, you have to be involved since the beginning, and especially for some customer can be also expensive if you are asking to external consulting services to do that. So I can understand it's not possible every time, and sometimes it works only if the first time that you are building something and not in a let me say improvement or existing application or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's really about culture. If a designer or a company needs to think about performance in the first stages of creating an application, or sketching the first drawing on a whiteboard of how the architecture is going to be. If you have performance in mind, of course it's going to be very good. But I think that's a culture thing, and it was mentioned a couple of times before. I think that's one of the key elements to getting successful self-service for anything, for the security performance. It's culture. It's not tools. The tools are there. It's still the people.
And
So
I would
just
say
before
as well.
before I let Mark say a note, I just have to remind to the attendees and the panelists, by the way, that you can submit your theme for the next PAC meetup. There is a link in the chat that Stefan has pushed, and Margot as well. There's a gift card of Amazon to win. So if you don't push any of your themes or thoughts or topic, I will probably push my own theme and win the 50 euros. So if you don't want to get 50 euros, I will get it. So it's up to you. So Mark, you want to say something?
I was going to say to Tuan as well, just thinking about the concept of empowerment, because one of the biggest things that was a breakthrough when I started having some automated self-service for performance feedback way back when, the first time I got this actually running, it was people witnessed that I wasn't doing magic dark art performance stuff. I was just like, look, I just ran 3 threads on these 3 calls, and boom, there's, as Steen said, there's your multi-threaded issue. And then here's another class loading issue. And here's a, throw in a Dynatrace dashboard on the Slack channel. And they're like, how are you doing that? And so part of it was taking away any barriers to them getting access to the tools, getting access to the data. They could write their own scripts. And we made it very simple. Someone could say, here's a folder share, just put your JMeter script in there and I'll run it for you. And they're like, great. And how can I stop the currently running load test and start getting that feedback? So there is a level of empowerment for testers and developers who maybe, oh, you don't have access to a lab, or we're going to argue about whether it matches production or all this stuff. I'm like, no, all you want to know is, did the number of calls to the database change from one build to the next? A very, very small metric. And they could self-serve that with a level of empowerment. So Tuan, I think you're totally right thinking about that in terms of, are we enabling people? Are we empowering them to be able to do that, and not coming and arguing about what is a perfect load test to an engineer in a dev environment?
And something I'd like to add, I think we didn't really talked about it. We talked about performance as self-service process. But if you don't have the freedom of running a test on your own environment, on your own stuff, you deploy, you're basically fully independent, self-service. I'm going to McDonald's, and I'm going to driving, and I'm going to buy my own stuff. Then it's possible. But if you're working in a classic old-fashioned environment where I'm not able to deploy anything in dev because it's the same dev environment, or if I'm using staging, which is the staging environment for 30,000 people, how do you get there? I think even just about cheat sheets and process and whatever, if you don't have the ability to be fully independent in a way you deploy stuff and run tests in your own small environments, I'm really questioning myself. Is it possible?
I will say, just to throw out to the panel, to the pack, as it were, there are times we all get engaged in more formal performance initiatives. But the truth be told, more often than not, I'd say even 70, 80% of the time, I'll get pulled in and they're already doing something off the grid or off, violating the rule. Oh, we're already running load in development. And you go to production and you're like, no one's allowed to run load in production. And then you find out it's like, oh yeah, we run load in production all the time. We have test accounts all over the place. And so I think more often than not, you want to find the people who have the passion and kind of the balls to go, hey, let's actually break the rules. Let's do it on our own. And then you're just kind of hooking on to their passion and their energy and saying, well, what are you guys learning? And what kind of metrics are you using? Oh, great. Hey, we can offer something to you that's more part of the formal process, or make this automated a little more for you, get you a little bit deeper data. And they're, oh, that's cool. We just been doing this in Skunkworks on the side. Maybe we could work together. So I find there's still people that are, whether they say they are or not, they're still running. They're running load in QA. All of a sudden somebody says, oh yeah, the UAT environment was down for the day. Why? So-and-so set up and ran a load test with 1,000 threads. It was like, we're not supposed to do that. They're like, yeah, we told them that, but they don't care. They still run it anyway. And that happened to me. Anyway, yeah, so it happens all the time. So I think it's finding those people that are already feeling free, but then figuring out how to harness and direct that energy towards something that's actually more useful and more meaningful to change.
Yeah, performance warriors. Sorry.
Go ahead, Jan. Go ahead. You were saying something.
No, sorry. I didn't. Yeah, I think you're right. It's Mark. It's finding those champions, if you like, within the IT, to getting those people who are enthusiastic, want to progress, improve, explore. Certainly, the cultural side of things is often a challenge. Try and break that old-fashioned mold or old-fashioned way of thinking. You find it in a lot of companies, and it's you can sort of explain what they can do to improve, but getting the momentum behind it is a real challenge. And I think it's a lot of impediment for a lot of companies making progress in terms of better code quality, better performance testing early in dev, running your JMeter tests against microservice endpoints, so forth. So I totally agree with what you're saying, Mike.
And just to add to that, I think that Andy, that you also mentioned in one of your million blog posts that you wrote, is when you do want to get there, is have buy-in by the big guys in your company. If they don't care and they don't understand, it becomes really, really complex. Then you're just that enthusiastic guru that is trying to convince others. But if there is a little bit of push from top to down, from the top down to the people doing the job, it's extremely helpful to change the culture, because otherwise it can become frustrated and you may be not so enthusiastic after trying for 3, 4, 5, 6 months.
And maybe that's also a good signal if your bosses is not, believing in it and not pushing it from top to bottom. Maybe you work in the wrong company.
Yeah, no, it's. I understand that some companies are actually in transition from typically you have companies that were really batch driven and now they're going digital and everything needs to be online, but they really don't have the knowledge yet of digital delivery. And sometimes they really need to build up that knowledge to understand, and that's sometimes those companies still exist, so can take some time.
I think
sometimes, and it's awful to say, but sometimes you need a disaster to let people understand, and I don't like that because it's not what we want, but sometimes that's what people need to understand, to put money aside to make it better. But I actually don't like to say that, but that sometimes helps.
Well, and from what you were saying, it's if you get that direct channel to management and to speak to them in my experience, it always helps to explain to them, yes, monetary terms, but even internal, when your solutions that are internal to application, not only sales applications, the people trying to do internal work in the organization with poorly performing applications will not be efficient, will not be productive, will probably even hate the system and the environment that you're asking them to do work on. And those are terms that can be probably more relatable to management. Of course, money, users, that customers that you lost that will never ever come back to your site because it was slow, poorly performing, or just plainly was down or out of service because of too much load. But I think the way also to make management aware of those possible, why it is important, is to talk to them in management terms. What are going to be the impacts that the organization will suffer if the performance is not assured, that you don't have good practices, and how can each impact on each of the areas?
Yeah, and there it's very easy when you have an e-commerce site, and then it's very easy to explain all that when you're down and how much money. But say that you.
Stijn,
we lost Stijn.
I think you're running. Someone in your organization running load tests on your network line.
That was
lost the connections.
Someone started watching a movie downstairs.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess he was going to say something.
I think that's what the problem. Yeah,
sorry,
Steven, you were saying something?
Yeah, I'm assuming he's going to say something along the lines of, well, if you don't have a retail website where you have customers and revenue coming in directly, and you have some complex, say, insurance system it's very hard to calculate necessarily what the cost of an outage or slowness is. You know, what is an extra 1 second in response time for a particular transaction? How do you put that in money figures? It's an extremely difficult thing to do.
Yeah, monetizing loss, the effect of performance is very difficult. I agree, Stephen. It's particularly in that sort of industry. Online retail business is a bit easier, isn't it? Well, if we're not selling, you won't sell this many widgets at $100 each. So you can monetize it easier. But something like insurance or something more esoteric, trying to build that into a business case to sort of encourage the powers that be to embrace change, try to define what the benefits are. It can be a challenge.
So I'd like to, Mark just raised the hand, but Vasilis didn't tell much. So I'm going to first put Vasilis first, and then I will let you, Mark, talk. So Vasilis, you want to say something?
Yeah, just to say on this one, I know sometimes it can be challenging, but because I have tested internal systems, there was an airline solution for internal people that were using it that manages the whole fleet of major organizations, major fleet airlines, and you can measure. I think you can measure the efficiency of the employees. You can measure the frustration of the employees using the system, and also how much time they would save if they had a good performance system. And we managed with some changes we have done to save, I think, an hour per day for some employees. And a lot of frustration. So sometimes you can quantify it, and even if not, sometimes you can even quantify the money they will be saving by just reducing the servers that your application is running if you solve the bottlenecks. And as we know, buying more CPU if you only need memory is not the solution. So making them understand where the bottleneck is and what the problem of their application is and how they can improve performance will save them a lot of money at the end, and we'll have happy employees using a fast performing system. So I think that's the solution for us when we're struggling, is we need to show them what benefit we're adding. It's quite important.
Yeah, agree, totally.
Mark?
Just going back a little bit to what Stephen was saying about quantifying this. And I think about it in our brothers and sisters in the InfoSec security space, where very often I don't have to justify a cost benefit analysis around doing pen testing or security testing, because mostly it's driven by fear of who knows what the cost could be. I mean, oh, we'll get sued, and there's the privacy and the violation of compliance, and oh, we're absolutely going to test the security stuff because it just scares the bejesus out of us. And functional testing is, if it doesn't work, you can't make money. So functional testing gets a lot of, I don't say a lot of support compared to security, but security just blindly, we're going to spend tons of money and get every tool you can think of, and static analysis and external companies in the whole 9 yards. So I'm wondering if I see in my company, I lean a little bit, I actually report into the infrastructure team coincidentally, but I use some of the same performance vulnerability, and what exploits a performance vulnerability is peak loads, unexpected peak loads from humans. Okay, great. Unexpected outage of a piece of hardware. It's a vulnerability, and it would only be exploited. What's the risk percentage over time? Well, this is a new piece of hardware versus an old piece of hardware that may be burning out or something. So I'm wandering a little bit in my current role into like performance vulnerabilities, the same way you have security vulnerabilities and you log them and what are the potential outcomes. And almost every time it's like, well, at the high end, we have to completely fail over to DR, and we know the estimated cost for that is, $100,000 a minute, or whatever it is we've put together for a high throughput site. So I don't know, it's just got me thinking that maybe that quantification, I would love to not have to get seriously hardcore numbers and just have everything driven on fear. But so many websites crash every day or systems fail every day that people are like, I'm not really scared of it anymore. Of course it's going to go down, and then we'll just fire something else up and push something else out.
So I'm looking at the watch. It's 8:15. I mean 9:15 in France, 8:15 in the UK for you, Vasilis. And
yep.
But I'd like to start to conclude, because obviously we can have that conversation forever. I know how passionate we are, all of them here. So I'd like to, what would be for each of you, so everyone will go, I will ask everyone the same question, but what would be the first recommendation that you will make to an organization that says, I want to do performance self-service? I just watched Andy's webinar. It's awesome. And Rob just did an awesome blog, and I want to implement it within my organization. So what would be your recommendation to say, okay, it's a great idea, it's awesome, but first do this? So Mark.
I think the very first step is to recognize where you're at in terms of process, skill, ability, and talent, and empowerment, and all those things about getting people to do better performance work is maybe second for me. I think it would really understanding how people work, not what's written on the whiteboard of, hey, here's our process, but actually observing how people handle performance information and do stuff, and their creative process or their process for reconciliation of that performance information. Really know your process well, and then figure out how to fit a little bit more performance information into that process. That would be my first step. So process is probably at the top of the list for me.
Steven, what would be your major recommendation out of the process? Because Mark only took the process stuff.
Okay, I'm going to pick something a little bit more specific, maybe not the first one on the list, but I'd say go make sure that you, wherever possible, try and aim to performance test in environments with mocked integrations, if you're in the developer delivery level. Otherwise, you're going to be just bogged down in the complexity of your massively complex integrated environments and needing test data from 14 different systems that need to sync. It's just going to kill you.
Okay. So I'm going to spoil. So what can I say about the tools? Great tools will save the world. Oh, Vasilis, you had a topic.
So I'd say two things. One, because I'm being forced. No, just joking. So I would say two things. There are great tools so you need to select the right tool. You all know which one it is in this case. I'm not gonna mention the name, but you'll know. And the second thing I would say is create the right performance culture to everyone in the organization. People need to understand how important performance is, and from developers, when writing one line of code, it will save you a lot of time if they are conscious about how their code will perform. From the architects, even when they design the solution, they shouldn't think just about the technology they are using, but they should think about performance from the beginning of designing the service. That's my tip.
One.
You stole my point, but for me, it's the most important is create incentive. If people want to do performance testing, they will start using tools and solutions, and then you can chase those people who are breaking the rules and start learning them how to do proper performance testing. So creating a performance culture, or starting to teach people why do we do performance testing, what's the benefits, how can we mitigate risk. That's the biggest and the first step you need to do, is create awareness about performance testing.
Cool. Good point. Andy? Andy, you're mute.
I think for me, pick 3 metrics, give these 3 metrics to the developer with every code commit, and see if it changes their behavior in case one of the metric changes. And take a metric like response time that's clear, memory consumption, number of interactions either with the database or with the backend service. That's it.
Makes sense.
Right.
3 cents.
And since we're talking tools, I think you need a tool to help them get that data. So we'll do a little tool plug. But yeah, I mean, I really think that, you know, I could tell you that developers don't often have access to infrastructure tooling, and there's really no excuse for that in this day and age. So I think really getting a monitoring tool like a Dynatrace in your infrastructure, getting that tool in the face of people, combine it with those 3 metrics Andy was rattling off. That's going to, you know, just democratize, you know, the information out there. And hopefully change the culture. When people see it and they're working from a shared set of tools, I think that's kind of where DBAs have their secret tools and the web guys have their secret tools. But if everyone has the same tool and seeing the same thing, then I think it breaks down those walls. And there's really, you know, let's just solve the problem. Let's not blame each other.
Jahn?
Yeah, well, I think from my perspective, and this is from personal experience, it's just get your development team to start doing non-functional testing. Yeah, add non-functional items to your sprints. Trend those, like Andrew said, pick 3 metrics, but trend those. Part of there's always that non-functional content in your sprints. Put it on a dashboard, big visualization somewhere. Just shout about it. Yeah, like, hey, we're doing this. We can see how good or bad our code quality is, because it all starts from code quality, doesn't it? So I think that's a logical point to engage. And it works, and usually you get least resistance from a cultural perspective if you start with the dev teams, because it's just a little bit of an extension of what they're already doing, adding the non-functional piece. So that's my recommendation. And if you're going to get anything into a company, regardless of culture, you've got most success. You'll have most, in my opinion, success of starting with the dev teams, getting them doing some level of non-functional testing.
So I see that Andy has moved from Kairos to Kentucky from the background. Luca, you want to add something here?
Yeah, because Lisa already mentioned a culture that I think is the first requirement for self automation. I think that the next one is really create a workflow, automated workflow, because it's the best way to follow everyone to be autonomous in creating their own little checks about performance without involving big team with big costs. So that's the key. Having automation in the full process allow everyone to be the tester for us and not really involve the big teams and having a big cost.
So I see that Leandro is not there. So Stein, are you still connected? You want to add something, or I could, while you're enabling?
Yeah, no, I can.
Yeah.
Do you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. For me, really, if you want to go into the self-service, look at what's possible and stop looking at what's not possible, what I did for a long time. So just give it a go. Listen to the tips that other people have given, apply, and we will get there. So just do it.
So good point. So just to correct what I said, it's not Kentucky. It's Linz. You can see that in your new fancy Dynatrace building just
It's a glowing,
Andy.
glowing box.
Yeah.
It's actually it would be cool if this would be the Dynatrace building. This is actually the Ars Electronica. I know it's a Lentos museum, and like opposite the Ars Electronica Center, but it is Linz, Austria.
Oh, our girlfriend is here. So Leandro, do you want to add something to conclude?
Hey, yeah, sorry, I had an order that just came in, performed better than I expected. I would like to give just 3 recommendations. As it was mentioned earlier, the very first one, visibility, the monitoring tools, being aware of the performance of your pieces of software, not only whole applications, because microservices, you can have the pieces spread all over the place. Visibility, do not overload with it, but make sure that you have it, everyone has it, the relevant pieces of visibility. And performance matters. I think that would be another one that I would add. Make sure that your code is being checked, that every time a developer finishes something, self-checks health for performance, stresses it a little bit before they check in, and that every piece that they produce, probably they create not necessarily a back door, but some device that enables them to or enables whoever is in charge of performance and load testing to easily invoke that process, method, service, or whatever, to gather those metrics. Those 2 are really, really important. Performance matters and metric visibility without overload.
Good point. One thing I'm just going to add, because I'm not sure that we add that in our...
Oh, and good load testing tools.
I mean, that was obviously
wink.
Yeah,
not
also,
even have to mention
Neotys.
about it.
I don't know if
Neoload.
you mentioned this. We should mention tools. I think, is that right, Andy? I think tools are important.
No,
Monitoring tools, yeah, that as well.
No. So I'd like to add the fact that we may probably have to leverage performance skills to the people that would be doing performance as a self-service. So if they're not understanding what is a throughput, if they're not understanding what is a queue length in a network card or IO disk, whatever, then I think even if you have the best tools in the market that provide the best metrics of the market, they won't necessarily be able to be efficient. So I think training is a core element. So I'd like to make also a big applause to Wilson. I know that CMG Impact and Wilson Mar is trying to build some content to train. So let's try to collaborate together to make that happening. Because I think if we can make something that trains all the community, that will be super awesome to everyone and to all the organizations. Again, let's make performance great again. Because I think if we do, everyone wants to use load testing, performance testing, APM products, AKMS, whatever it is. So again, I'd like to thank you all, to all the PAC member, to Mark, to Steven. Steven, thanks again. You woke up super early for us. I'd like to thank you for that. Vasilis, live from the moon. Again, thanks to have the right satellite connections to reach out to us. Tuan from Netherlands. Andy, just close to the Dynatrace office. He just traveled from Keros to Linz in a few seconds. That was amazing. Rob from, I guess it's the Boston Stadium. I don't know where it is, but
That's right. Yep.
it is. Jahn, thanks for connecting and interacting with us. That was super useful.
Very
Luca, it's always a pleasure to have you on board, and it's always great to have news from the Como Lake. It's awesome. Leandro, master of OBS Studio, thanks to be here. And for the others who did not have the ability to interact with us, Alexander Panalko, who was here, Andrea and Mohan, thanks for everyone. Again, don't forget to submit your paper before tonight tomorrow morning. Tomorrow I'm not working. I'm gonna doing some hard work on my house, but I will look at your topics tomorrow, and I will pick one of them. And one of you.
I'm going to offer a topic just right off the top here. What music do you listen to when you first run your load test? What's your load testing playlist?
Appetite for Destruction.
Perfect episodes.
Too Drunk 2. I'll leave the last word if you know the Dead Kennedys.
Oh.
No.
So yeah, so please submit your topic, because tomorrow, probably at the end of the day, I will select one of the theme that you have all submitted, and we will announce Friday morning who won the 50 euros gift cards. Thanks everyone. Thanks again, and have a pleasant end of the day. Have a pleasant Wednesday, and see you next week.
Everyone
Bye.
stay safe.
Bye bye.
Gracias.
Yeah.
Besos.
Bye.
Besos.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.